A young Marquess helped a woman in distress, not knowing she was the queen who would decide his fate. Before we begin this beautiful period romance story, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where you're joining me from. The night had turned to fury. Rain beat against the cobblestones of the Pont Neuf, washing away the last traces of daylight, until Paris seemed swallowed by water and darkness. Julien de Montclair pressed his gloved hand to the glass of his carriage and called for the coachman to slow. "Careful, Baptiste. The horses will slip if you force them," he warned. Baptiste nodded, struggling against the wind. The lamps flickered, their weak light catching on sheets of rain that ran like silver threads through the night. Julien leaned forward, restless. He hated travelling through the city after dusk, but his mother's letter from Montclair Manor had urged him to return before morning. He meant to obey until that faint sound broke through the storm, a cry. Not the sharp tone of a vendor or the laughter of drunks along the riverbanks, but something raw, frightened, and very near. Julien raised a hand. "Stop!" The horses reared slightly. The carriage shuddered to a halt. Julien opened the door and stepped down, rain soaking his coat instantly. The air smelled of mud and wet stone. His boots splashed into puddles as he moved toward the source of the sound. At first, he saw nothing, only the swirling rain over the dark river. Then a flash of movement caught his eye beneath the arch of the bridge. A woman cornered by two guards. Their lanterns threw trembling light on the wall, illuminating her torn cloak, the white of her hands raised in defense. Julien strode forward. "What goes on here?" One guard turned sharply, squinting through the downpour. "Stand back, monsieur. This woman is to be questioned by order of the palace." In the middle of the night, on the riverbank, Julien's voice held the calm authority of his rank. "Since when does justice operate in secret?" She was seen fleeing from the Rue Saint-Honoré. No proper woman runs so late unless she hides something. The other guard reached for her arm. She twisted away with a cry that pierced through the thunder. Something in that sound stirred Julien's instinct, an echo of desperation too real to ignore. He took a step closer. "Release her." The guards hesitated. The rain ran in streams down Julien's hair and coat, yet his eyes remained fixed, cold, commanding. The younger guard muttered, "And who are you to order the king's men?" "Julien de Montclair, Marquess of Artois." His name carried enough weight to silence them. "If this woman is guilty of any crime, bring her before the magistrate in daylight. Until then, she is under my protection." The guards exchanged uneasy glances. "We'll report this," one said, lowering his lantern. "Do so," Julien replied. "Tell them the Marquess prevented an injustice." They withdrew, their boots splashing down the quay until the storm swallowed their retreat. Julien turned to the woman. She had backed against the wall, trembling, her face hidden beneath the hood. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head but did not speak. Rain streamed from her cloak, forming small rivulets at her feet. "You cannot remain here," he said more gently. "Come with me. My carriage is close." Her voice came at last, soft, but edged with fear. "Why would you help me, my lord? You know nothing of me. Because you are alone. And they were two. That is reason enough." She hesitated, then allowed him to guide her forward. Her hand was cold, light as a child's, yet her step quickened when thunder cracked overhead. He shielded her with his coat as they hurried toward the waiting carriage. Baptiste's eyes widened at the sight of her. Julien merely said, "Drive to the Rue Saint-Jacques, slowly." Inside, the air was thick with damp wool and candle smoke. The woman sank into the corner seat, clutching her cloak tightly. Julien sat opposite her, watching as the flicker of the lantern revealed her trembling chin, the delicate curve of her mouth. "You need not be afraid," he said quietly. "No one will harm you now." Her hands loosened slightly. "You should not have interfered, monsieur. The guards will speak of it." "Let them. I have done nothing shameful." "You risked much for a stranger. Then perhaps you will tell me your name," he said with a faint smile. Her eyes lifted to his for the first time. They were clear and dark, holding something unspoken, weariness perhaps, or the remnants of tears. Names can be dangerous things, not when they are spoken in trust. She looked away, her gaze fixed on the rain streaking the window. "Then call me no name at all, as you wish." For a time, neither spoke. The wheels rolled softly over the slick stones. Julien studied her in the wavering light, trying to read what sort of life had led her to this desperate night. Her dress, though torn, was of fine cloth. The clasp of her cloak, barely visible, bore a small sapphire stone, an ornament too costly for a common woman. He wanted to ask, but something in her silence restrained him. At length she said, "Do you believe in providence, monsieur? That people meet for reasons beyond themselves?" "I believe in choice," he answered. "But sometimes choice feels like fate." A faint smile touched her lips. "Then perhaps we share the same misfortune." He leaned back, studying her more closely. "Misfortune? To meet when we should not have." Before he could reply, the carriage jolted to a stop. Baptiste's muffled voice came from outside. "My lord, the road ahead is flooded." Julian looked out. Water glistened like molten glass beneath the wheels. "Turn toward the southern bridge," he called. Then to the woman, "You'll be safe at my house until morning." She drew back slightly. "I cannot. I must—" "You can hardly return to the river," he said gently. "You are welcome under my roof for one night only. No one shall question you." Her hands tightened again around the cloak. "You give shelter without knowing to whom?" "I prefer to know the soul before the title." That silenced her. The carriage moved again, more slowly now, through narrow streets, where the water reflected the dim lights of taverns long closed. The storm began to fade into steady rain, and a fragile peace settled between them. When they arrived, Julian led her inside through the servants' entrance to avoid attention. The house was quiet, most of his staff asleep. A single candle burned in the entrance hall, throwing soft gold against the panelled walls. "Marie will bring you dry clothes," he said to her, calling for the housekeeper. The woman caught his sleeve. "No servants, please." He hesitated. "As you wish. Then I shall bring them myself." He returned a few minutes later with a shawl and a simple gown belonging to his late sister. She took them with a whispered thank you. "You may rest here," he said, showing her to a small guest room near the library. "There is a fire and you'll be warm soon. If you need anything." "I have already taken too much." "You have taken nothing," he replied. "Good night." He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. "Why are you so kind, my lord?" He looked back at her. "Perhaps because kindness is too rare in this city." Her gaze softened, and for a brief moment she seemed about to speak again. Then she lowered her head. "Good night, monsieur." He closed the door quietly behind him. Julian did not sleep. He paced the library, the storm's fading rhythm echoing in his thoughts. Who was she? What danger chased her through the streets with palace guards at her heels? He could not guess, yet her voice lingered in his memory, gentle, measured, carrying the faint accent of court education. By dawn, the rain had ceased. Light crept across the tall windows, glimmering on rows of books and silver frames. Julian finally sat down, exhaustion heavy in his limbs. He told himself that when she awoke he would ask her truthfully who she was and why the guards sought her. Then he would send her safely on her way. But when he climbed the stairs to the guest room, the bed was empty. The shawl lay folded neatly on the chair. The gown he had brought remained untouched. Only the faint imprint of her presence lingered. An open window, curtains fluttering softly in the morning air. Julian stepped closer, frowning. On the small table by the fire, something caught the light. A brooch, sapphire and silver. He lifted it carefully. The jewel was exquisite, deep blue at its center, surrounded by tiny fleur-de-lis carved into gold. And on the back, engraved with delicate precision, the unmistakable royal crest of France. He stood still, the world narrowing to that single glint of blue. The woman he had saved by the Seine was gone, leaving behind the symbol of the crown itself. The morning light over Paris was pale and thin, as though the storm had washed away all color. Julian sat at his desk, the sapphire brooch before him, gleaming faintly in the weak sun. He turned it in his fingers, tracing the small fleur-de-lis with his thumb. There could be no mistake, it was a royal emblem. Baptiste entered quietly. "The lady, my lord. Did she leave before dawn?" "She left without a word," Julian said, still staring at the jewel. "And she left this behind." Baptiste leaned closer, eyes widening. "That is the Queen's crest." Julian looked up sharply. "You're certain?" "I saw one like it once, at the palace gates during a procession. It was pinned to Her Majesty's mantle." Julian's heart gave a small unsteady beat. "Then heaven help her, and perhaps heaven help me." He wrapped the brooch in a handkerchief and locked it in the drawer of his desk. Not a word of this to anyone, Baptiste. Not a whisper. The coachman nodded nervously. Do you think she was truly the Queen, my lord? Julian shook his head. No. The Queen does not flee through the streets in the rain. But his tone lacked conviction, and both men knew it. By afternoon, the city was alive with rumor. News traveled faster than reason in Paris. Shopkeepers spoke in low voices of soldiers moving through the night, of someone seen escaping near the river. Some said a court lady had been abducted, others that the Queen herself had gone missing for several hours. Julian heard fragments in every corner of his day. At the Café de l'Europe, a merchant leaned toward him and whispered, "They say the palace is furious. A scandal, my lord. Something to do with a missing royal jewel." Julian froze, his cup halfway to his lips. A jewel? A sapphire, perhaps? Or a ring? No one knows. Only that the Queen's personal guard searched half of Paris at dawn. Julian set his cup down slowly. Gossip thrives on smoke, not fire. The man smiled. Perhaps. But smoke often means something is burning. Julian left the cafe without finishing his drink. Every sound of hoofbeats behind him made him tense. By evening, he was sure that someone followed his carriage. Twice he ordered Baptiste to turn down unexpected streets, and each time the same shadowed riders lingered a few lengths behind. At home, he locked the door of his study and took out the brooch once more. It felt heavier now, as though the sapphire held not light but a secret. He told himself to take it to the authorities, to prove his innocence before suspicion ever touched him. But then he saw her face in memory, the pale, frightened woman in the rain, and knew that to surrender the brooch was to betray her. Whoever she was, she had trusted him by leaving it behind. Or perhaps she had no choice. That night, Julian slept little. The wind outside carried the echo of distant voices and the faint rhythm of bells from Notre Dame. When dawn came again, Baptiste entered, holding a letter sealed in gold. Julian broke the seal and read the message aloud. By royal order, the Marquess de Montclair is to appear at Versailles within 3 days to answer before the Crown concerning matters of the realm. Baptiste's face paled. The Queen summons you? So it seems. Julian folded the letter carefully. Then we shall obey. The journey to Versailles was long and silent. As the carriage passed through the gates of the great palace, Julian could not shake the unease that clung to him like damp air. Servants hurried through marble corridors, carrying messages, whispering. Everywhere he looked, he saw the gleam of gold and the weight of watchful eyes. An officer escorted him through the hall of mirrors, where light scattered across glass and gilded frames like fragments of frozen sunlight. At the far end of the hall, beneath the royal canopy, stood the Queen. Julian's breath caught. She was dressed in ivory silk, her dark hair swept high, her posture calm and regal. But her eyes, those eyes, he knew them. The same eyes that had met his in the storm, wide with fear and gratitude. He knelt immediately, forcing his heartbeat to steady. "Your Majesty," the Queen's voice was composed. "Rise, my lord. You have been summoned for a simple matter of inquiry." Julian rose, his gaze fixed on the polished floor. "At your service, Your Majesty." The chamber was full of courtiers. Count Varnier stood beside the throne, his expression sharp and proud. "This man," he said, "was seen near the Seine on the night of Her Majesty's disappearance." The Queen's fingers tightened around the armrest of her chair. "Disappearance, Count?" Varnier bowed slightly. "A lapse of security, no more, but certain irregularities must be addressed. The Marquess was observed assisting a cloaked woman that same night." Julian lifted his head. "If the Count refers to a frightened stranger pursued by guards, then yes, I did assist her. I found no crime in mercy." Varnier smiled thinly. "And you did not think to ask who she was?" "I asked, and she refused to tell me. Yet you gave her shelter for a single night." The Queen's gaze met his briefly. Her voice was even. "You acted from compassion, Lord Montclair." "Yes, Your Majesty." A pause followed, long and fragile. The courtiers exchanged glances. Varnier inclined his head toward the Queen. "The Crown is grateful for your explanation, my lord, but some matters remain uncertain." "Then ask plainly," Julian said, his tone steady though his pulse raced. Varnier's smile deepened. "A certain royal jewel is missing." A sapphire brooch bearing the crest of France. Have you seen such an object? Julien felt the air grow thin. Every heartbeat seemed to echo in his chest. No, my lord, he said quietly. I have not. The Queen's eyes flickered, her lips tightening for the briefest instant. Then we thank you for your time, she said, her voice a shade too controlled. You may retire for now. Julien bowed low. Your Majesty. As he turned to leave, Count Varnier's voice followed him, cool and polite. The Crown may request your presence again soon. Do not leave Paris without permission. I have no intention of fleeing, Julien replied, and walked out beneath the glittering mirrors that seemed to watch him with silent judgment. Outside, he breathed deeply, the cold air cutting through his thoughts. The Queen had not betrayed him, yet she had not defended him either. Perhaps she dared not. That night, in a small inn near the palace, Julien wrote a letter he never sent. Your Majesty, I will not speak of that night. Not to any man, however high his rank. Whatever danger binds you, I will share it in silence. He burned the paper after reading it twice, watching the flame consume the words. Days passed. Rumour grew stronger. Some said the Marquess de Montclair was under investigation for treason. Others whispered he had charmed the Queen herself. Everywhere Julien went, he felt eyes following him. His friends began to avoid him politely. At a dinner hosted by the Duc de Vervaux, an old acquaintance approached him with false cheer. My dear Julien, you've become the most discussed man in Paris. They say the Queen owes you a great debt, or that you owe her one. People speak too freely when they know too little, Julien replied, finishing his wine. Still, the Duke said, lowering his voice, if you value your name, stay away from Versailles. Count Varnier is a dangerous enemy. Julien smiled faintly. And yet, the Queen's eyes did not seem those of an enemy. Her eyes are nothing compared to her power. Be cautious, my friend. Later that night, walking alone along the Quai Voltaire, Julien heard the faint clatter of hooves behind him. A messenger dismounted, bowing quickly. From the royal household, my lord. Julien broke the seal. Inside, on a slip of parchment, were only a few words written in a hand he recognized. Do not come to the palace again. Destroy the sapphire if you still have it. It can ruin us both. The message bore no signature, but none was needed. Julien folded the paper, feeling the weight of every letter. The Queen's handwriting. Elegant, swift, unmistakable. So she knew he had kept the brooch. She feared it could expose them both. He walked home in silence, the city lights reflecting on the river like broken stars. Once there, he unlocked the drawer and stared at the jewel. The sapphire shone coolly, innocent of guilt, yet bound with it. He took it in his hand, stepped to the hearth and held it above the flames. But something stopped him. Perhaps it was pride, or memory, or a stubborn sense of fate. Whatever it was, he could not destroy it. He wrapped it again and placed it in the secret compartment behind the library shelves. That same hour in the palace, Queen Isabel stood at her window, staring into the gardens where rain still glistened on marble statues. Count Varnier entered quietly. You seem troubled, Your Majesty, he said. I am troubled by whispers. They fade with time, if one silences their source. She turned to him sharply. You speak too easily of silencing. Varnier bowed. I speak of loyalty. The Marquess is dangerous, Your Majesty. He knows something he should not. Leave him be. Until when? Until he tells the world of that night? He will not. You trust too much. I know him better than you think. Varnier's eyes narrowed slightly. Then forgive my frankness, Majesty, but it is dangerous for a queen to know any man too well. He withdrew with a bow, leaving her alone with her thoughts. Isabel sank into the chair by the fire, her hand trembling slightly as she pressed it to her temple. She had thought the storm had ended that night by the Seine. She had been wrong, and somewhere outside the palace walls, another storm was already gathering. At that very moment, in the dim corridor below the Queen's chambers, a servant loyal to Count Varnier paused beside an open window, holding a folded piece of parchment. He had followed Julien earlier that day and seen the exchange with the messenger. He smiled thinly and slipped away into the shadows, the paper hidden beneath his coat, ready to deliver it to the Count before dawn. The following morning, Julien was summoned again to Versailles. The summons arrived before breakfast, carried by a pale young courier who avoided his eyes. Julien thanked him, dismissed Baptiste's questions, and prepared himself without a word. When he reached the palace, the corridors seemed colder than before. The sound of distant music floated through marble halls, but no laughter followed it. Courtiers passed him like shadows, their whispers trailing after his steps. He was shown not to the Hall of Mirrors this time, but to a smaller salon lined with tall windows and silk curtains drawn against the light. At the center of the room stood Queen Isabel. She wore no jewels, only a simple gown of blue velvet. Her composure was perfect, but Julian saw the strain in her eyes. 2 guards stood near the door. A third, Count Varnier, waited beside her with folded hands. "Your Majesty," Julian said quietly, bowing. "Leave us," Isabel told the guards. Her tone was gentle but firm. They hesitated, glancing toward Varnier. "Her Majesty prefers privacy," she added, her gaze never leaving Julian. The men bowed and stepped out. Varnier alone remained. "Count," she said, "I will speak to the Marquess alone." Varnier's thin lips curved. "As you wish, Majesty. I will await outside." When the door closed behind him, the silence deepened. Julian could hear the faint rustle of the Queen's gown as she turned toward the window. "I should not have called you here," she said softly. "Yet here I am." She looked back at him. "Why did you not destroy it?" Julian understood at once. "Because I thought it was not mine to destroy." Her expression flickered with something between gratitude and fear. "Then you understand what danger you hold." "I understand that danger follows truth," he said, "but I do not yet know what truth this sapphire hides." Isabel moved closer, lowering her voice. "The night you found me, I had escaped the palace. I had learned that Count Varnier meant to bind me to a treaty with Spain by marriage. I needed to breathe, to walk the city as a woman, not a queen. But my absence was discovered before I returned. The guards chased me. You know the rest." Julian listened, his pulse steady but his chest tight. "You risked your throne for one night of freedom." She smiled faintly. "Perhaps it was foolish. Yet you, of all men, should know what it is to live under duty." "I know what it is to live under silence," he said. For a moment they said nothing. The air between them was filled with everything they could not speak aloud. At last she said, "You must return the brooch to me, quietly. It will end this." He hesitated. "If it ends the suspicion, yes. But will it end Varnier's pursuit?" Her eyes met his. "He will never stop until he controls everything I touch. Then he will come for me. That is why you must be cautious. I have defended you as much as I can." He stepped closer. "And yet, Your Majesty, if I am seen meeting you in secret, your defense will be your ruin." She drew in a breath. "Then we must both choose ruin or silence." Their eyes held, and for the first time since the night by the Seine, she looked not like a monarch but like the woman he had once sheltered. The door opened without warning. Count Varnier entered, his face smooth but his eyes sharp. "Forgive me, Majesty. I feared for your safety." Isabel straightened, her voice cool once more. "You need not fear the Marquess, Count." "Fear?" "No," he said, bowing slightly. "Only vigilance." He turned to Julian. "The court expects loyalty from those who serve near the crown." Julian met his gaze calmly. "Loyalty is a matter of the heart, Count. Some men serve out of fear, others out of faith." Varnier's smile thinned. "And which kind are you?" "The kind who remembers a favor and does not sell it." The Queen spoke before Varnier could reply. "That will be all, gentlemen. My duties await." Julian bowed and turned to leave, but as he passed, he felt Varnier's eyes burn into his back. Outside in the corridor, the Count caught up to him. "A word, my lord." Julian stopped. "If it concerns my loyalty, we have already spoken." Varnier's voice lowered. "It concerns your future. There are forces greater than one woman's gratitude. Walk carefully, or even the Queen's grace will not save you." Julian met his gaze evenly. "Perhaps not. But I did not ask to be saved." He left the Count standing in the marble hall, his cloak trailing behind him like a shadow. That evening, word spread through the court. The Queen had defended the Marquess of Montclair in the council chamber. Some called it charity, others folly. Varnier called it proof of influence. Julian returned to his house in silence. Baptiste met him at the door, anxious. "The palace guard came again, my lord. They asked questions about the night by the river." "What did you tell them?" "The truth. "That I know nothing." Julian nodded, removing his gloves. "If they return, tell them the same." He entered his study and poured a glass of wine, but the taste felt like ash. He thought of the Queen standing beneath the mirrors, her voice steady while her world trembled. She had trusted him enough to confess what no one else could hear. That trust was now his burden. The following days passed under a cloud of suspicion. Everywhere Julian went, people spoke of treason, of nobles arrested for whispering sympathy toward the people. France was restless. Even the laughter in the salon sounded forced, brittle like crystal about to crack. One evening, Julian received another summons, this time to attend a public gathering at Versailles in honor of a visiting ambassador. It was not a request he could refuse. The ballroom glittered with candlelight and silk, the air perfumed with rosewater and envy. Julian arrived in a dark coat, his face composed, his thoughts elsewhere. Across the crowd, he saw Queen Isabel seated on the dais, surrounded by courtiers. Her poise was perfect. No one would have guessed the fear that had driven her into the night only weeks before. As the orchestra began to play, Julian took a glass from a passing tray. A whisper reached him, two women speaking near the column. "They say the Marquess knows her secret," one murmured. "Then he should pray he keeps it," replied the other. Julian turned away, unwilling to feed their curiosity. He was about to retreat to the gallery when a quiet voice behind him said, "You should not have come." He turned. Isabel stood a few steps away, her hand lightly resting on the back of a chair. She had crossed the room unnoticed, her expression calm but her eyes urgent. "You summoned me, Majesty." "Not to this." "Then why am I here?" "Because Varnier demanded it," she whispered. "He wishes to watch how we look at one another." Julian's jaw tightened. "Then let him see nothing." He bowed low as though greeting her for the first time. "Your Majesty honors her court with her radiance," he said aloud, his tone perfectly formal. She inclined her head, answering in kind. "The Marquess of Montclair is too gracious." To the surrounding guests it was a polite exchange, nothing more. But in the brief glance they shared, 100 words passed in silence. When the music ended, Isabel turned to address the ambassador, and Julian withdrew to the edge of the hall. There Count Varnier approached him once more, smiling. "You play your part well, my lord," the Count said. "The Queen smiles, and you bow. The court applauds. Yet behind every gesture lies something hidden." Julian replied calmly, "Perhaps what lies hidden is your imagination." Varnier's eyes glinted. "Then you will not mind if I have your house searched, for reassurance, of course." Julian met his gaze without flinching. "Search it, then. You will find nothing that belongs to you." Varnier's smile vanished. "We shall see." He turned and melted into the crowd. Julian felt the blood drain from his face. He finished his wine and left the hall before the next dance began. By dawn, soldiers arrived at Montclair's residence with orders to inspect the premises. Julian watched them overturn drawers, lift carpets, question servants. He said nothing. When the search was done, the captain approached. "We found no contraband, my lord." "Then you have your answer." The man hesitated. "Still, we are told to report that you resisted nothing. That may count in your favor." When they left, Julian went straight to the library and opened the hidden compartment. The sapphire still lay there, untouched. He stared at it for a long time, then locked it again. Later that day, unable to rest, he rode back to Versailles. He requested an audience, but the Queen was said to be indisposed. He waited in the garden until twilight, when the palace lamps began to glow. Finally, a messenger approached and handed him a folded note. Her handwriting was unmistakable. "Do not come again. Destroy the jewel. It can no longer protect either of us." Julian crumpled the paper in his hand. The sun sank behind the marble statues, casting long shadows across the path. Inside the palace, hidden behind a curtain, Queen Isabel watched him from the window. Her hands were clasped tightly, her face unreadable. Count Varnier stepped beside her. "You see, Majesty, even now he lingers like a moth to the flame." She said nothing. "Shall I order his arrest?" Her voice, when it came, was quiet. "Not yet. Then when? When I am certain that the moth is not the fire." Varnier smiled thinly. "Majesty, in my experience, they are often the same." She turned from the window, her heart pounding beneath her calm exterior. Outside, Julian mounted his horse and rode away into the gathering dusk, unaware that from the shadows beneath the colonnade, a servant watched him depart, carrying a report meant for Count Varnier. The morning after the search, Julien's estate stood in uneasy silence. Servants whispered in corners, frightened by the soldier's visit. The air itself seemed to carry the echo of accusation. Julien moved through the hall with calm dignity, but his heart was heavy. He had kept his word, yet the world seemed determined to punish him for it. Baptiste entered holding a sealed document. "From Versailles, my lord." Julien took it without comment. The seal was the Queen's. Inside was a single line, written in haste. "Meet me at dusk in the eastern garden by the fountain. Come alone." Julien closed the letter slowly. "Tell them to prepare my horse." He spent the rest of the day in quiet work, sorting letters, giving orders, pretending all was well. But his thoughts never left the palace or the danger that awaited there. As the sun began to sink, he changed his coat, slipped the sapphire brooch into his pocket, and rode toward Versailles under the fading light. The eastern garden lay behind the orangery, far from the promenades where courtiers strolled. By the time he reached it, the sky had turned violet, and the fountains whispered softly among the hedges. She was already there. Queen Isabel stood near the water's edge, her face half shadowed by the last of the day. She wore a plain cloak and no attendants. When she saw him, she stepped forward, her voice urgent. "You should not have come," she said. "You asked me to. I did not expect you would risk it. Then you do not know me as well as you think." Her lips trembled with something between fear and gratitude. "They will destroy you if they learn of this meeting. Count Varnier suspects everything." "He already suspects," Julien replied. "Meeting you or not meeting you changes nothing." She glanced around the garden, lowering her voice. "The Count believes you have the brooch. He has searched your house and found nothing. That only convinces him further that you hide it. And if I return it now? He would say you stole it. The brooch is not merely a jewel, Julien. It is proof. If found in your possession, it would condemn you." Julien looked at her steadily. "Then tell me what it truly means." Isabel hesitated, as though measuring how much she could trust him. "The sapphire was a gift from the king to me on the day of our marriage, a symbol of my vows and of France's crown. When I fled the palace that night, I carried it still. If the ministers knew I lost it while running through the streets, they would use it as proof of madness, of unfitness to rule. And so they search for it to use against you," Julien said quietly. "Yes. If Count Varnier finds it, he will destroy me." Julien stepped closer. "Then let me destroy it." Her eyes widened. "No, it will end this torment for both of us." She shook her head. "It cannot be replaced. It is the symbol of my reign, whether I love or hate it. Without it, they would claim I abandoned my duty." Julien watched her, seeing not a queen, but a woman chained by a crown. "Then what do you wish me to do?" "Keep it hidden, somewhere no one can reach. Promise me that whatever happens, you will not bring it to the palace again." He bowed his head slightly. "You have my word." For a moment, they stood in silence. The evening wind moved through the trees, scattering petals across the stone path. Her hand brushed her cloak, then paused. "Julien," she said softly. It was the first time she had spoken his name without title. "I owe you more than gratitude. You could have betrayed me 12 times, yet you never did." "I did nothing extraordinary," he said. "Only what any man with a conscience should do." She gave a faint, almost sorrowful smile. "Then conscience is rarer than I thought." Their eyes met and held. The stillness between them felt heavier than the air. Then a sound shattered it, the faint scrape of a boot on gravel. Isabel froze. Julien turned sharply toward the hedges. Between the leaves, a flicker of movement vanished. "Someone is there," he whispered. Isabel's breath caught. "Varnier's spies. Go back inside at once." "And you?" "I will delay them." She hesitated, torn between command and fear. "You cannot fight them." "I can mislead them," he said, already stepping away. "If they see me leave first, they will follow me, not you." Her voice trembled. "You would risk yourself again for me." He looked back over his shoulder. "You already know the answer." She drew in a sharp breath but obeyed, disappearing down the path toward the palace. Julien turned the other way, moving quickly through the garden until he reached the outer gate. He could hear footsteps behind him now, 2, perhaps 3 men. He mounted his horse and rode away without looking back. By the time he reached his estate, the moon was high. Baptiste met him at the door, alarmed. "You were followed, my lord. Riders came half an hour after you left." Julian's expression hardened. "Did they enter the house?" "They circled the grounds, but the gates were closed." "Keep them closed," Julian said. "No one enters without my order." He went straight to his study and locked the door. From his coat, he took the sapphire brooch and set it on the desk. The gem glimmered softly in the candlelight, serene amid the storm it caused. He thought of her words, "Keep it hidden." He opened the fireplace grate and removed a loose stone from the hearth. Behind it was a small recess, known only to him and his father before him. He placed the jewel inside and replaced the stone carefully. A knock came at the door. "My lord," Baptiste said, "a messenger from Versailles. Urgent." "Send him in." The messenger entered, soaked with rain. "I bring an order from Count Varnier. The Marquess de Montclair is to present himself at court tomorrow at dawn." Julian's mouth tightened. What accusation this time? The man shrugged. "I do not read the papers I deliver, my lord." When he was gone, Julian sat for a long time, staring at the dying fire. Then he rose and took up his coat again. If the Count meant to accuse him, he would face it with the same dignity that had carried him this far. At dawn, Versailles stood grey beneath the clouds. The courtiers gathered in the council chamber, restless and whispering. Julian entered with calm steps, his eyes finding the Queen immediately. She sat on the throne, pale but composed, surrounded by her ministers. Count Varnier stood beside her, holding a folder of documents. The room fell silent. "Lord Montclair," Varnier began smoothly, "you are summoned to answer a charge of withholding royal property. Do you deny it?" "I deny all that is false," Julian said. Varnier opened the folder and drew out a sheet. "Testimony has been given that you were seen near the Eastern Garden last night, speaking privately with Her Majesty." Julian's heart sank. He had known he was followed. "And is it a crime to walk in a royal garden?" "Not unless one plots treason beneath the roses," Varnier replied. A murmur rippled through the hall. Isabel's voice cut through it like glass. "Count, you presume too much." "I seek only to protect your Majesty's name." "From what?" she asked sharply. "From scandal." Julian stepped forward. "There is no scandal." Varnier's eyes gleamed. "Then where is the missing jewel?" Julian remained silent. The Count smiled as if he had expected that answer. "Your silence condemns you." Before he could speak again, Isabel rose from her seat. "Enough. The Marquess has served the crown with honor. There will be no further accusation without proof." Varnier bowed, his smile unchanged. "As your Majesty commands, but proof has a way of finding itself." Julian met the Queen's eyes briefly before bowing. "I ask permission to withdraw." "Granted," she said, her voice steady, though her hands trembled on the armrest. He turned and walked from the chamber, every step echoing on the marble floor. Behind him, the whispers swelled again. That night, a sealed letter arrived at his estate, bearing the royal crest but written in a different hand, Count Varnier's. It read, "You are requested to remain within your lands until the investigation is concluded. The penalty for disobedience will be severe." Julian read it once, then tossed it into the fire. He looked through the window toward the dark horizon. Somewhere beyond those clouds was the palace, and the woman who had changed everything. A light flickered near the gates. Baptiste entered hurriedly. "My lord, there is someone outside, a servant from Versailles. She says she bears a message from Her Majesty herself." Julian's pulse quickened. "Bring her in." The servant stepped inside, soaked and breathless. "The Queen bids you burn the letters you received, all of them, and she sends warning. Count Varnier knows about the brooch." Julian's eyes darkened. "Then he means to act tonight." Before the woman could answer, a sudden noise echoed through the courtyard, the crack of distant hoofbeats. Baptiste ran to the window. "Riders, my lord, armed riders approaching from the north." Julian crossed the room in 2 strides, his mind already set. "Hide the servant, bolt the doors. No one enters this house until I command it." Outside, the wind carried the thunder of horses drawing nearer. The sound of hooves grew louder with every heartbeat, echoing through the stone courtyard like thunder. Baptiste bolted the doors as ordered, his hands shaking. Julian moved to the window, watching the dark shapes take form, 6 riders, cloaked in the royal colors. The seal on their saddles told him all he needed to know. They were sent by Count Varnier. "They will search the house again," Baptiste said in a whisper. Julien turned from the window, his voice calm. Then they will find only what I allow. He walked quickly to the fireplace, lifted the iron poker, and pried loose the stone concealing the brooch. The sapphire glinted in the firelight like a single captured star. For a moment, he stared at it, the weight of it pressing on him more than its worth. Then he slipped it into the lining of his coat, where no search would find it. The pounding on the door began. "Open in the name of the crown," Julien nodded to Baptiste. "Let them in." The coachman hesitated. "My lord, do as I say." The bolts scraped open, and the door swung wide. Rain and wind swept into the hall, along with a dozen soldiers in drenched cloaks. At their head stood Captain Peril, the same man who had led the previous search. His face was expressionless. "By royal command," he said, unrolling a paper sealed in wax, "we are ordered to take custody of Lord Montclair until further notice. You will come with us." Julien's voice remained steady. "On what charge?" "That is for the Crown to decide. Then I will hear it from the Crown's own lips. You will hear it in due time." Julien took his gloves from the table and slipped them on. "Very well." Baptiste stepped forward anxiously. "My lord, you cannot go with them alone." Julien's gaze softened. "Do not fear for me, old friend. Fear for truth. She is the only prisoner tonight." He followed the soldiers into the storm. The rain fell hard, soaking through his coat, but he did not flinch. Behind him the gates of Montclair closed with a hollow sound, like the ending of one life before another began. They rode through the night to Versailles. When dawn broke, pale and cold, Julien was led through the palace corridors not to the grand salons, but to a smaller chamber below the council rooms. There, a single lamp burned. Count Varnier waited, his hands folded behind his back. "Lord Montclair," he said smoothly, "forgive the discomfort. The Queen wished to see you again, but I persuaded her that it would be unwise." Julien stood tall. "You speak for Her Majesty now?" "I speak for the safety of France. France does not tremble before one man's conscience." Varnier smiled faintly. "You are brave, my lord, and yet foolish. The Queen's favour has blinded you. Tell me, where is the brooch?" Julien said nothing. Varnier stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You have no friends left at court, no one to protect you. If you hand it over now, I can ensure your exile remains peaceful. And if I refuse, then you will not leave this palace at all." Julien met his gaze evenly. "Then it seems we are at an end." Varnier's smile faded. He motioned to the guards. "Search him." 2 soldiers stepped forward. Julien did not resist, but their hands found nothing. They stripped his coat, shook the lining, checked every fold of his garments. The sapphire remained hidden, sewn deep within the seam by his own quick hand the night before. When they finished, Varnier's eyes narrowed. "You are clever, but I will find it, and when I do, not even the Queen will be able to save you." Julien's voice was calm. "It is not the Queen I need saving from." Varnier gave a signal, and the guards led him away to a small room with no windows, only a wooden bench and a single candle. The door shut with a heavy thud. Hours passed. Julien sat in silence, the flickering light casting long shadows on the walls. The faint murmur of voices came from beyond the door. He closed his eyes, thinking of her, her eyes, her courage, her secret trust. He had made his choice the night he first offered her shelter. Whatever came now was only the cost of keeping that promise. At last, the door opened. It was not a guard who entered, but a woman cloaked in grey. Her face was half hidden by a veil, yet he knew her instantly. "Majesty," he said quietly. She closed the door behind her. "You should not call me that here." "Then what shall I call you?" "Someone who cannot sleep while you are blamed for her sins." Julien rose. "You must not be seen here. If they find you—" "They already suspect everything," she said, her voice trembling. "I cannot let them take you in my place." "They will not. Varnier has no proof. He will invent it." He took her hands. "Then you must deny him the chance. Deny everything." Her eyes filled with tears. "And let them destroy you. If that saves you, then yes." She shook her head fiercely. "You speak of sacrifice as if it were virtue. But I have had enough of virtue, Julien. I want truth." "Then hear it." he said softly. "The truth is that I would rather lose my name, my title, and my life than see you harmed. So go, leave this place before the guards return." She stared at him for a long moment. Then she stepped closer, her voice barely more than a breath. "You do not know what it is to have power and still be helpless." "I think I do," he answered. "Every time I look at you." The door suddenly rattled. Voices echoed from the hall. Isabel's face went pale. "You must go now," Julian whispered. She hesitated only a second longer, then slipped out through the hidden door that connected to the servants' passage. The sound of her footsteps faded just as the guards entered again. "Your confinement is lifted," one of them announced curtly. "You are to appear before the council within the hour." Julian's expression did not change. "As the Crown commands." They escorted him upstairs to the Hall of Justice. The ministers gathered around a long table, their faces solemn. Count Varnier stood at the head, the Queen seated beside him. Her expression was unreadable, her gaze fixed on the papers before her. Julian bowed. "Your Majesty," Varnier began, his voice smooth as ever. "Lord Montclair, you stand accused of concealing property belonging to the Crown. Do you deny the charge?" "I do." "Then prove your innocence. Produce the missing jewel." Julian looked at him steadily. "I cannot produce what I never possessed." A murmur ran through the ministers. Varnier smiled thinly. "So be it. You leave us no choice." He turned to the Queen. "Majesty, the Council advises that the Marquess be stripped of his title and exiled until further investigation." Isabel's lips parted, but no words came. Her hand trembled slightly over the seal of the royal decree. Julian's gaze found hers. "If that is your Majesty's will, I will obey it." For a heartbeat, silence filled the room. Then she spoke, her voice clear though strained. "So be it. The Marquess de Montclair is to depart Paris by sunrise." Varnier smiled in triumph. The courtiers bowed. Julian inclined his head in acceptance, though his chest burned with quiet grief. When the council dispersed, Isabel remained seated, her hands still on the decree. Only when the chamber was empty did she whisper, "Forgive me." Julian, already near the door, turned back. "There is nothing to forgive, Majesty. You did what you must." "And you?" she asked. "What will you do?" He paused. "What I must." He bowed once more and left the hall, his footsteps echoing long after the doors closed behind him. Outside, the air smelled of rain and stone. The sky above Versailles was grey, heavy with unshed tears. Baptiste waited by the carriage, his face pale. "It's true, then," the old coachman said quietly. "They've exiled you." Julian nodded. "We leave before dawn." As he stepped into the carriage, he glanced once toward the palace windows. He could not see her, but he felt her gaze all the same. Hours later, when night had settled again, the palace was still. In her chamber, Isabel sat alone beside the fire, a parchment on her lap. She stared at the flames until they blurred into shapes. Then she whispered, "If I cannot free him as a queen, I will free him as a woman." She rose, took a candle, and crossed the room to her writing desk. Her pen moved quickly across the page. "Go to your estate. Wait. When I come to you, we will end this deceit together." She sealed the letter with her own crest and handed it to her most trusted maid. "Take this to Montclair Manor. No one must see you." The maid bowed and slipped away into the night. By morning, Julian was gone from Paris, the Queen's secret letter racing behind him. But before the message reached his hands, Count Varnier stood by the palace gate, speaking to a guard whose loyalty was easily purchased. "The Queen's maid left the palace tonight," Varnier said quietly. "Follow her. Bring me what she carries." The guard nodded, and within minutes, a dark rider vanished into the mist, his orders clear. The road to Montclair was long and rough after the rain. Julian rode in silence beside the carriage that carried his few belongings, the sky heavy above him, the air thick with the scent of wet earth. Every mile seemed to pull him farther from the world he had known, yet closer to the strange calm that comes when a man has nothing left to lose. Baptiste rode a few paces behind. "It grieves me, my lord," he said finally. "All you did was help a stranger. For that, they send you away." Julian's eyes stayed on the road. "It is the fate of those who act before they question. And the Queen, will she not call you back?" Julian did not answer. He thought of her letter. The one he did not yet know was still trapped between the palace and the road. "Her Majesty has done what she must. I can ask no more." They reached Montclair by nightfall. The manor, half in shadow, waited like an old friend who had suffered long neglect. Julian dismounted and stood before the gates. "Home," he murmured, though it felt nothing like it. Inside, the halls smelled of dust and memory. Servants lit fires, and soon the familiar crackle of wood filled the air. Baptiste unpacked the few trunks they had brought, muttering under his breath about the injustice of the world. Julian wandered through the old corridors, his footsteps echoing. He paused before a portrait of his late father, a stern man with sharp eyes and the faintest trace of kindness at the mouth. "You taught me to serve with honor," Julian said softly, "but you never said honor might cost a man everything." Outside, the wind stirred through the vineyard that stretched behind the house, dry and pale after years of neglect. He would need to tend it, he thought. The land might be his refuge now. Days passed quietly. The routine of labor filled the emptiness. Julian rose before dawn, inspected the fields, spoke with the tenants, and wrote letters to creditors he could no longer pay. The noise of Paris faded from his thoughts. Only one image remained constant: her face in the hall that last morning, the way her eyes had trembled, yet held his without fear. One evening, as he returned from the fields, Baptiste hurried toward him, holding an envelope sealed in wax. "From Versailles, my lord, delivered by a traveller who refused to wait for a reply." Julian took it, his breath catching when he saw the familiar crest. He broke the seal quickly. The letter was short. "Go to your estate. Wait. When I come to you, we will end this deceit together." He read it twice, then again. A faint smile touched his lips for the first time in weeks. "She has not forgotten," he said under his breath. Baptiste frowned. "Is it wise to trust her, my lord? The palace is full of spies." "I trust the woman I met that night by the river," Julian said simply. That night he could not sleep. He walked the length of the terrace until the moon climbed high above the valley. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. He thought of the Queen traveling the same country roads, risking everything to see him again. The idea seemed impossible, and yet she had defied impossibility before. At dawn he began to prepare the house. He ordered the servants to ready the guest chambers and dismissed those he could not trust. "We expect a visitor," he told Baptiste, who stared at him as if he had lost his senses. By the second night, the sky grew restless with clouds again. Julian stood at the window, listening for the sound of hooves. None came. He waited through the third night as well. Still nothing. On the fourth morning, a rider arrived, breathless and muddy from the road. Julian met him at the gate. "Message for Lord Montclair," the man said, handing him a folded scrap of parchment. Julian opened it, and his heart tightened. The handwriting was not Isabel's, it was Count Varnier's. "Your exile was mercy. Do not mistake it for safety. The Queen's favor cannot reach beyond Versailles. Destroy what you hold, or it will destroy you." Julian crumpled the note. "Tell your master he wastes his ink," he said coldly. The messenger bowed and rode away. Baptiste watched him go. "The Count threatens even from afar." "What now?" "Now," Julian said. "We wait." 2 more days passed. Then, near midnight, the sound of wheels echoed down the lane. Julian rushed to the window. A small carriage approached, its lamps dimmed, its horses weary from travel. He was at the door before it stopped. When the coachman opened it, a cloaked figure stepped out, slender, graceful, unmistakable. "Majesty," he whispered. "Not here," she said quickly. "Not now." She pulled back her hood, and the firelight from the hall revealed her face, tired, pale, yet radiant with relief. "Forgive the hour," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I could not trust the roads by day." Julian bowed his head. "You are safe now." "Am I?" she asked. "Even walls have ears." He led her inside, dismissing the servants and closing the heavy doors. When they were alone, she let out a long breath, as though she had held it for days. "I have little time," she said. "Count Varnier's spies are everywhere. He means to prove I conspired with you to hide the brooch." Julian frowned. "Then why come here? If he learns you left Versailles, he already suspects. I came because I could not let him write the end of our story." He studied her face. "What do you intend?" "To end this before he can use it against us. The sapphire must be destroyed." Julian hesitated. "You told me it could not be. I was wrong. I believed it bound to my crown, but now I see it binds me to him instead. As long as it exists, he holds my freedom, and yours." She held out her hand. "I still have it?" "Yes." "Then give it to me." Julian reached into his coat and withdrew the small velvet pouch. He placed it in her hand. She looked down at it for a long moment before whispering, "It is strange how such a small thing can command so many lives." She stepped to the hearth, holding the pouch above the flames. The sapphire caught the firelight, glowing like a living thing. Her hand trembled. Julian moved beside her. "Let me do it." "No," she said softly. "This began with me. It should end with me." She opened her hand, and the brooch fell into the fire. For an instant the sapphire burned brighter than the flame itself, then vanished into ash. Isabel watched in silence, tears glimmering in her eyes. Julian spoke gently. "You are free now." "Free?" she echoed. "Freedom built on ruin is still a cage." He took her hand. "Then let this place be the door." A knock shattered the stillness. Baptiste's voice came through the door, urgent. "My lord, riders approach again from the north road." Isabel's eyes widened. "They've found me." "Go to the cellar," Julian said quickly. "There's a passage that leads to the vineyards." "I will not run while you face them." "Then you condemn us both." She hesitated, torn between pride and fear. "What will you tell them?" "The truth, that no queen is here." She looked at him one last time, then pressed her hand to his. "Whatever happens, remember, I came because I chose to." He led her down the narrow stairs to the hidden passage, then returned to the hall. The pounding on the door had already begun. Baptiste stood ready, pale and breathless. "Shall I open?" "Not yet." Julian took a breath, steadying himself. "When I speak, say nothing unless they ask." The pounding grew louder. He nodded, and Baptiste pulled the bolts free. The doors burst open. Count Varnier himself strode in, his cloak dripping with rain. Soldiers followed, their torches scattering orange light across the room. "Good evening, my lord," Varnier said, his tone smooth. "I trust we arrive at a convenient hour." Julian met his gaze calmly. "For what purpose do you darken my door again, Count?" "To ensure the Queen's safety. She was seen leaving Versailles last night, and her carriage vanished on this road." Julian's voice did not waver. "You think she would flee to the home of the man you exiled?" "I think desperation makes strange allies." "Search if you must," Julian said, stepping aside. "You will find no queen here." Varnier's eyes narrowed. "We shall see." He gestured, and the soldiers began to search. They moved through every chamber, overturning trunks, opening wardrobes, striking walls with the butts of their muskets. The manor echoed with their noise. Varnier walked slowly through the hall, studying Julia. "You are calm for a man under suspicion." "I have learned that guilt shouts louder than innocence," Julian replied. The Count smiled coldly. "And which are you tonight? Ask your conscience." Minutes later, one of the soldiers appeared at the top of the stairs. "Nothing, sir, the house is empty." Varnier turned back to Julia. "If you are lying, I will know. The Queen cannot vanish forever." "Then perhaps you have lost more than your honor," Julian said quietly. Varnier's jaw tightened. "Remember this night, Montclair. When the truth surfaces, and it will, you will not have another chance to speak." He turned sharply, his cloak sweeping the floor, and the soldiers followed him out into the storm. Julian waited until their torches disappeared down the road before closing the doors again. The hall fell silent except for the rain. Baptiste looked at him in awe. "They believed you, my lord." "For now," Julian said, "but belief is a fragile thing." He went down to the cellar, opened the hidden door, and found Isabel waiting in the shadows, her cloak damp with cold, but her eyes fierce. "They are gone," she whispered. "For now." She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "Then what now?" Julian listened to the distant echo of hooves fading into the night. "Now," he said, "we prepare for what comes next." Outside, through the cracks in the shutters, the last torchlight flickered once more, then turned back toward Montclair Manor. Julian stood perfectly still, listening. The faint sound of hooves that had faded moments ago now returned, slower this time, deliberate, as if the riders had turned back. His hand tightened on the edge of the cellar door. "They're coming again," he said quietly. Isabel's eyes widened in the dim light. "Then he suspects." "He suspects everything," Julian replied. "But suspicion is not proof. You must remain hidden. I will not cower while you face him alone, she said, her voice firm despite her fear. You must. If he sees you, all is lost. The fire has destroyed the sapphire, but he will invent another crime to trap us both. Her breath trembled. You speak as if the world belongs to him. It belongs to those who control fear, Julian answered, and Count Varnier feeds on it. Do not give him what he wants. He closed the cellar door softly and turned to Baptiste. Bar it from the inside when I leave. No one opens it until I return. Baptiste's voice broke with worry. My lord, if they mean to harm you, then let them try, Julian said. But they will not touch her. He moved quickly through the corridor, his boots silent on the stone. By the time he reached the entrance hall, the pounding at the door had already begun again, harder, more impatient than before. Julian opened it himself. Count Varnier stood in the threshold, rain dripping from his hat. His expression was calm, too calm. Forgive the intrusion, Lord Montclair, he said. A storm compels one to seek shelter. You mistake this house for an inn, Julian replied evenly. Not an inn, Varnier said, stepping inside uninvited, but perhaps a sanctuary. He looked around the hall with measured eyes. Your fires burn brightly for a man living in exile. Julian ignored the remark. What brings you back, Count? You searched the house not an hour ago. Indeed, but as I rode away, I wondered, why so compliant? Why so eager to open your doors? The innocent often fear injustice more than the guilty fear exposure. Julian folded his arms. Then you have studied guilt closely. Varnier smiled thinly. I study all things that threaten the crown. You mean the Queen? The Count's eyes hardened. She is the crown, and yet you treat her as your prisoner. Varnier's hand brushed the hilt of his glove, a gesture of restraint rather than threat. Careful, Marquess. Words weigh heavier than chains. Julian met his gaze without blinking. Then perhaps I have grown strong enough to carry them. Varnier's patience slipped. Where is she? Julian said nothing. The Count stepped closer. You think me a fool. The Queen's carriage was seen on this very road. Her coachman was found not a mile from here, alone. Do you imagine she vanished into mist? Julian's jaw tightened. If you have lost your Queen, do not look for her in my home. She has a gift for escaping through unlikely doors, Varnier said softly. You of all men should know that. The room was silent except for the hiss of rain outside. The Count glanced toward the staircase, his eyes sharp and searching. I could order my men to search again. You already did, Julian replied, twice. Then perhaps a third time will bring better fortune. Julian stepped forward, blocking the way. No soldier crosses this threshold without a warrant signed by the Queen herself. Varnier's lips curved into a smile that was all venom. Ah, but that is the difficulty, is it not? The Queen herself is missing. For a moment, neither spoke. The air grew heavy with the weight of that single sentence. Julian's pulse thudded in his ears. Missing, he repeated. Varnier's tone was smooth, almost gentle. As of dawn today, her absence cannot be denied. The council has convened. The ministers are in chaos. They will look to me for order, and I will provide it. When they ask where their queen has gone, your name will be on every tongue. Julian's face remained composed, though his stomach turned to ice. Then I am to be your scapegoat. You misunderstand, Varnier said softly. You are to be my proof. He motioned to the soldiers at the door. Search again. Julian's hand shot out, gripping Varnier's arm. You overstep your right. The Count's eyes flashed. And you overstep your place. They stood locked in silence until one of the soldiers cleared his throat nervously. Varnier tore his arm free. Search the grounds, he said coldly. Every corner, every stable, every wall. Bring me what you find. The soldiers scattered, their boots echoing through the corridors. Julian forced himself to breathe steadily. You will find nothing, he said. We shall see. Varnier moved toward the library, his gaze drifting across the shelves. Tell me, Montclair, does she trust you? Enough to confess everything? Julian did not answer. The Count smiled faintly. Your silence speaks. Dangerous loyalty, that kind. It burns both master and servant. She is neither, Julian said quietly. Nor am I. Varnier turned, his expression sharp. Then what are you to her? A man who once helped a woman in distress, Julian said. and who will not betray her now. Before the Count could reply, a soldier appeared in the doorway, breathless and wet from the rain. "My lord, we found something behind the stables." Vanier's eyes lit with satisfaction. "Bring it here." The man hesitated. "It's a cloak, sir. Silk, torn. The color is royal blue." Vanier took it from him, holding the wet fabric between his gloved fingers. "How curious," he murmured. "Royal blue. The same shade Her Majesty favors." Julian's heart clenched. He recognized it instantly, the cloak Isabel had worn on her arrival. She must have dropped it when they hurried to the cellar. Vanier turned to him, triumph in his eyes. "So, the Queen has been here." Julian's voice was calm, but his chest burned. "Or one of her attendants." The Count laughed softly. "You play the game well, my lord. But even the clever grow careless when they protect something dear." Julian met his gaze. "You came looking for a criminal, Count. All you have found is a cloak." "For now," Vanier said. He handed the fabric to his soldier. "Seal the estate. No one enters or leaves without my order." "You have no authority here," Julian said sharply. Vanier leaned close, his voice low and dangerous. "I have all the authority fear can give me." Then he turned toward the door. "Keep watch. I will return by morning." When the last soldier had gone, Julian stood alone in the hall, his pulse still pounding. Baptiste emerged from the shadows. "My lord, he found her cloak." "I saw. What now?" Julian's voice was quiet but firm. "Now we move before he does." He went back down to the cellar. Isabel stood waiting in the darkness, her face pale but resolute. "I heard his voice," she whispered. "He will not stop." "No," Julian said. "He will not. That is why we must leave tonight." She stared at him. "Leave? Where could we go?" "South," he said. "Beyond the Loire to my cousin's estate. It is remote and loyal. You will be safe there until I can clear your name." "And you?" "I will return once I have drawn him away." Her hand caught his sleeve. "You would face him alone again?" "It is the only way." "Then I will not go." "You must." Their eyes met, and the silence between them said everything words could not. Finally she whispered, "If you are captured, they will call it treason. Then I will die an honest man," he said simply. For a moment, neither moved. Then she nodded, the faintest tear glistening on her cheek. "Very well, but promise me you will follow after me soon." "I promise." He led her through the narrow tunnel that ran beneath the vineyards, the path damp and cold. At its end, Baptiste waited with 2 horses and a single lantern. "They are ready," Baptiste said. Julian helped Isabel mount, then pressed her hand briefly. "Ride hard until the first bridge. From there, follow the river. The dawn will hide your tracks." She looked down at him, her voice shaking. "And you?" "I will delay them." She wanted to speak, but the words failed her. Instead, she leaned down, her hand brushing his cheek, a fleeting touch, more powerful than any farewell. Then she spurred the horse forward, vanishing into the night. Julian watched until the darkness swallowed her completely. Then he turned back toward the house. Baptiste caught his arm. "My lord, the Count's men guard every road. You cannot face them alone." "I have faced worse," Julian said. "Go after her, protect her." Baptiste hesitated, torn. "And leave you to him?" "Yes, that is an order." Reluctantly, the old coachman obeyed, riding into the darkness after the Queen. Julian returned to the manor, extinguished every lamp except one, and waited. Outside, the rain had ceased. The silence was thick, unnatural. Then, faintly, he heard the crunch of gravel. The Count had come back sooner than expected. Julien stepped to the window and saw torchlight moving through the trees. Vanier's voice carried clearly through the damp air. "Search the vineyards. She cannot be far." Julien's heart raced. Isabel was still within reach of the estate. He turned from the window, reaching for his cloak. Outside, the first of the soldiers crossed the field, their torches blazing like fireflies in the mist, closing in on the hidden path that led to her escape. Julian threw on his cloak and ran into the night. The air was heavy with mist, the ground slick beneath his boots. The torches ahead flickered through the fog like restless stars, moving toward the vineyard where Isabel had ridden moments before. He could hear Vanier's voice shouting orders, low, sharp, determined. "Fan out! She must be close. Search every path." Julian ducked behind the old stone wall that bordered the vineyard. His pulse hammered in his ears. He could see the glimmer of helmets through the vines. There was no time to think, only to act. He moved quickly along the inner wall toward the stables where the spare horses were kept. The animals stamped nervously, sensing the tension in the air. Julian grabbed a handful of grain and threw it to the far corner to distract them before opening the gate quietly. One horse snorted, pawed the ground, then slipped into the field. "Over there!" a soldier cried. "A horse!" The men turned at once, rushing after it. Julian seized the moment, running the other way toward the hills behind the manor. His boots slid in the mud, but he kept his footing. He could still hear Varnier barking commands. "Do not let her escape. The Queen belongs to France, and to me." Julian reached the crest of the hill and looked down. The river glimmered faintly in the distance. Somewhere beyond it, Isabel and Baptiste would be following the same path. He prayed the rain and the fog would hide their tracks. A voice called from below. "There, someone on the ridge!" Julian turned sharply. The torchlight swung toward him, bright and blinding. He ran, his cloak whipping behind him. Branches caught at his sleeves as he plunged into the woods. The shouts grew louder. He reached the edge of the forest and stopped to catch his breath. The silence that followed was sudden, strange. Only the whisper of water filled the air. He realized he had reached the stream that cut across the valley, narrow but deep enough to slow pursuit. He waded through, the cold biting into his legs, and climbed the opposite bank. For a moment, the world was nothing but fog and silence. Then he heard it, the faint sound of hooves ahead. "Baptiste," he called softly. A shape emerged from the mist. "My lord!" Baptiste's voice trembled with relief. "You found us!" Julian reached them. Isabel sat astride her horse, her face pale but calm. "The soldiers—" "Searching the vineyards," Julian said. "But they'll spread soon. We must move east toward the forest road." "We cannot outrun them forever," Baptiste warned. "Then we must vanish," Julian replied. "The fog will favor us if we keep to the marshes." They rode hard through the lowlands, where the mist hung thick over the reeds. The horses splashed through shallow pools, their hooves muffled in the mud. No lights followed. For the first time that night, silence felt like safety. When they reached a cluster of trees, Julian halted. "We'll rest here for a moment." Isabel dismounted slowly, her legs trembling. Baptiste spread his coat on the ground for her to sit. Julian took one of the horses by the reins and led it a short distance away to listen. The night was eerily still. "They've lost the trail," he said at last. "Not for long," Isabel murmured. "He will never stop." Julian knelt beside her. "He can chase a crown, but not a ghost. Tonight we are both invisible." She gave a faint, weary smile. Invisible, yet hunted by every shadow. He wanted to tell her that they were safe, but the words would have been a lie. Instead, he said, "We must reach the old abbey at Montreux by dawn. No one will look for a queen in a ruin. And if they do, then I will find another place to hide you." She looked at him, her eyes glimmering with the faint light of the moon. "How long can one man stand against a kingdom?" "As long as he must," Julian said. Before she could answer, a sound broke the stillness, the distant call of a horn. One, then another. Baptiste's face went pale. "They've found the river crossing." Julian rose at once. "We ride again." They mounted quickly and pushed on. The ground rose sharply ahead, turning into rocky slopes. The fog began to thin, revealing the faint outline of the abbey's tower in the distance. Its bell no longer rang, its walls crumbled, but to Julian it looked like salvation. Behind them the horns grew louder. Isabel's horse stumbled, exhausted. Julian slowed his pace beside her. "Courage. Just a little farther. I can go on," she said, though her voice trembled. He reached for the reins. "I will not leave you." "Nor I you," she answered. When they reached the ruins, the first light of dawn touched the horizon. The abbey stood silent, a skeleton of stone and ivy. Julian led the horses inside through a broken archway. The walls offered little shelter, but they were hidden from the road. They dismounted and found a dry corner beneath the old bell tower. Isabel sank onto the ground, her cloak clinging to her shoulders. "Rest," Julian said softly. "I'll keep watch." She looked up at him. "You have not slept in 2 nights. Sleep is for men with peace." She touched his hand lightly. "Then rest beside me for a moment. Even a hunted man must breathe." He hesitated, then sat beside her. The silence between them was deep, but not empty. Outside, the morning mist began to fade, revealing fields bathed in pale light. For a few stolen moments, the world seemed almost kind, but the sound of hoofbeats shattered it. Julian was on his feet at once. "They're here." Baptiste ran to the edge of the wall and peered out. "They've surrounded the hill, my lord. There's no way down." Isabel rose quickly, her face pale but composed. "We cannot be taken together." "Then you must go alone," Julian said. "No." "Yes," he insisted. "Through the crypt, there's an old passage that leads into the woods. Take Baptiste, I'll draw them away." "I will not abandon you again." He met her gaze, his voice steady. "This is not farewell, it is survival." She shook her head, tears glimmering in her eyes. "If they find you, they will kill you. Better me than you. Julian." He caught her hand and pressed it to his lips. "Go, please." For a heartbeat she stood motionless, then turned to Baptiste. "Take me to the passage." When they disappeared through the crumbling archway, Julian climbed to the tower. From there, he could see the soldiers closing in, a dozen, perhaps more. At their head rode Count Vanier, his cloak snapping in the wind. "Montclair," the Count's voice echoed through the ruins. "You cannot hide forever. The Queen will be found, and you with her." Julian stepped to the edge of the tower, his silhouette clear against the sky. "Then come and find me," he called. The Count's eyes flashed with triumph. "So the gallant Marquess chooses defiance. Where is she?" Julian said nothing. Vanier dismounted, his boots striking the stones. "You think to protect her by silence? Fool. When the council learns she fled with you, France will curse your name. Then let them," Julian said. "A man's name is worth less than a woman's life." Vanier's mouth curved into a cruel smile. "Ah, then it is love." Julian's voice was calm. "It is loyalty." "Love by another name." The Count turned to his men. "Search the ruins. The Queen cannot have gone far." Julian moved down the stairway as quietly as he could. Every sound echoed against the stone. He reached the lower chamber, just as the first soldiers entered from the far side. He darted through the shadows, drawing them away from the passage. The soldiers followed, shouting. He led them toward the collapsed section of the wall, where daylight streamed through the cracks. When he reached the opening, he stopped. Beyond it lay the slope that dropped to the forest path. He could see the faint movement of two horses disappearing among the trees. Relief surged through him. She had escaped. A voice shouted behind him, "There! He's fleeing!" Julian turned to face them. Count Vanier stepped into the light, pistol in hand. "End this charade, Montclair." "Where is she?" Julian's jaw set. "Beyond your reach." Vanier raised the pistol. "You mistake me. My reach extends as far as my ambition." Julian's gaze was steady. "Then may your ambition die with your honor." The Count's hand trembled with rage. "You will regret those words." "I already do," Julian said quietly, "because they were wasted on a coward." Vanier's face twisted. The shot rang out, deafening in the stone chamber. Julian staggered, the echo filling the ruins. The world blurred for a moment, but he stayed on his feet, gripping the wall. The pistol smoke drifted in the cold air. Vanier lowered the weapon, his smile thin. "Now the Queen will mourn her knight, and I will claim her crown." Julian's vision swam. He pressed a hand to his side. His fingers came away red. From outside came a cry, the sound of hooves returning, fast and furious. Vanier's head turned sharply toward the sound. A voice rose through the air, clear and commanding. "Stand down, Count Vanier, by order of your queen." The soldiers froze where they stood. The echo of that voice filled the ruins like a bell tolling through stone. Count Vanier's hand stiffened on the pistol, his eyes wide for a heartbeat, then narrowing quickly into disbelief. "That is impossible," he muttered. But through the broken archway rode Queen Isabel. Her cloak was torn, her face pale with exhaustion, yet her posture was regal, commanding. The dawn light framed her like a crown of its own. She dismounted before the Count could speak. "Lower your weapon," she said coldly. "You will not raise it again in my presence." The soldiers exchanged uncertain glances. Vanier hesitated, caught between obedience and rage. "Majesty," he said slowly, forcing a bow, "I feared for your safety. I came to—" "You came to hunt me," she interrupted. and to destroy the man who has done nothing but protect me." Her words cut the air. She stepped closer, her eyes burning. "Do you deny it?" Varnier's mouth tightened. "I followed orders of the council. You were missing. He was suspected of treason." "By your whispering," she snapped. "You poisoned my court with suspicion and turned loyalty into crime." Julian, still leaning against the wall, tried to speak. "Majesty, enough. He is not worth your wrath." Isabel turned to him, her composure cracking for an instant. "You are wounded." "It is nothing," he said, though his voice was faint. She took a step toward him, but Varnier blocked her path. "Majesty, the man has deceived you. He has hidden evidence of your silence." The single word carried such force that even the soldiers stepped back. Isabel faced the Count squarely. "You will say nothing more until I command it. As for the evidence you seek, the sapphire no longer exists. I destroyed it with my own hands." Varnier's expression faltered. "You... what?" "It was mine to destroy," she said, "and by that act your power over me ends." He stared at her, momentarily lost for words. The soldiers behind him shifted uneasily, unsure of where authority now lay. "You have overstepped yourself, Count," Isabel continued. "You dared accuse a nobleman without proof, and you dared to pursue your queen as if she were your captive. For that you will answer to the council." Varnier tried to recover his composure. "Majesty, you cannot mean—" "I mean exactly what I say." Her gaze turned to the soldiers. "Disarm him." No one moved at first. Then one of the men, older, uncertain, stepped forward and took the pistol from Varnier's hand. Another removed the sword from his belt. The Count's face burned crimson with humiliation. "You will regret this, Your Majesty," he said bitterly. "You make yourself weak by sparing traitors." "I spare no traitors," Isabel said. "Only the innocent." Varnier's lips curled in a sneer. "Then may innocence comfort you when France turns against her queen." She did not answer. "Take him back to Versailles," she ordered the guards. "He is under arrest by royal decree. I will speak to the council myself." The soldiers saluted awkwardly and began to lead him away. As they disappeared through the archway, Varnier's voice trailed back to her, cold, venomous. "You will never be free of me." The sound of hooves faded into the distance. Only then did Isabel let her shoulders fall. The weight of the last days pressed down on her all at once. Julian tried to straighten but staggered, the color draining from his face. She ran to him, catching his arm. "Sit," she said, guiding him to the stone bench beneath the window. "You are losing too much blood." "It is only a scratch," he murmured. "Do not lie to me now." Her hands trembled as she tore a strip from her cloak and pressed it against the wound at his side. "Hold this." He obeyed silently, watching her face. There was no trace of the Queen's practiced calm now. Only the trembling urgency of a woman who feared too much had already been lost. "You should not have come back," he said. She looked up sharply. "Would you rather I had left you to die?" "I would rather you lived to rule." "I am not a ruler tonight," she whispered. "Only Isabel." The name hung between them, soft and fragile. He reached for her hand. "Then Isabel has saved me more than once." "Julian," she said quietly, "what will they do to you now?" "Without the brooch, the Count's case dies with his ambition," he answered. "The council will not question your word. You are free." "And you?" "I will fade from their memory, as all exiled men do." Her grip on his hand tightened. "I will not allow it." He smiled faintly. "Some memories are safer in silence." She shook her head, tears glimmering in her eyes. "You speak as if our story ends here." "It must. Because of duty. Because of danger," he said softly. "I would rather vanish than see your reign shadowed by me." She rose abruptly, walking to the window. The early sun lit the valley below, the mist lifting like smoke after battle. Her voice came low but steady. "You are wrong. My reign was shadowed the moment I forgot compassion. It was restored the night you reminded me of it." Julian said nothing. She turned back to him. "Do you know what they called me before I was queen? The Iron Heart. They said I was born for thrones, not tenderness. You proved them wrong." He tried to rise, but the pain forced him back. "Majesty, if I did anything worthy, it was only because I saw you as more than a crown." Her gaze softened. "Then see me as I am now." She knelt before him, taking his hands. "The court will speak. They will say you seduced your queen, that you betrayed your king's memory. They will try to destroy you, But I have learned something of courage from you, Julian. I will not hide the truth any longer. You cannot, he said quickly. If they know, they already know enough to hate. Let them also learn to understand. Isabel. She silenced him with a look. No titles, no masks. The storm has passed, and I will no longer live in fear of thunder. He met her gaze, the breath catching in his throat. For a long moment, the world outside seemed to fall away. The soldiers, the council, even the ruins themselves. Then she smiled faintly. You once said choice feels like fate. Perhaps this is mine. Before he could speak, Baptiste appeared at the archway, leading the horses. His eyes filled with quiet relief at the sight of them both. The soldiers are gone, my lord. They rode toward the city. Then we have little time, Isabel said, rising. Julian must be taken to Montclair before word spreads. Majesty, Baptiste said hesitantly, it may be safer if we ride apart. She looked to Julian. I will not leave him. Then we ride together, Julian said, his strength returning. They mounted and set off through the valley. The morning air was cool, clean, washed of smoke and fear. Behind them, the abbey stood silent again, its stones holding the last echoes of their flight. For hours they rode in peace, speaking little. The road wound through fields bright with new sunlight. At last they reached the gates of Montclair. The servants rushed out in astonishment, bowing low. Julian dismounted slowly, grimacing at the pain in his side. Isabel moved to help him, but he caught her hand gently. Majesty, he said softly, you should return before the council gathers. And leave you? Yes. The kingdom will need you when this storm is forgotten. She looked around the courtyard, the quiet house, the hills beyond, the life he had once known before all this began. I envy the peace of this place, she said. It was peace without meaning, he replied. Now I know the difference. She turned back to him. You once told me mercy was stronger than fear. Today I learned it is also stronger than pride. Julian smiled faintly. Then France is in good hands. She hesitated, as if searching for words that did not yet exist. Finally she said, I will go, but not forever. When my duty is done, I will return here, not as a queen seeking refuge, but as a woman who owes her happiness to one man. Isabel, he said, his voice low. The world may not forgive such defiance. Then let the world wait, she answered. They stood for a long moment, hands still joined. Then she turned to Baptiste. Prepare a carriage for Versailles. I will face the council before the day ends. As she mounted her horse, the sun broke through the clouds. The light touched her face, and for the first time in years, she looked unburdened. Julian, she said softly, whatever they say, remember this. You saved more than my life. You saved my soul. He bowed his head. Then it was worth every wound. She smiled, a quiet promise hidden in the curve of her lips. Farewell for now. He watched her ride away, her figure growing smaller along the winding road, until at last she vanished beyond the hills. The wind stirred the vineyards, carrying the faint sound of distant bells from the valley below. Julian turned toward the house, unaware that within the hour, a royal messenger would gallop through those same gates with a letter sealed in the Queen's own hand. The afternoon sun spilled over the hills of Montclair like molten gold. The vineyards shimmered under its warmth, and the air was filled with the faint hum of life returning after long silence. Julian stood on the terrace, his arm still bound from the wound that was nearly healed. It had been 3 weeks since the Queen had left, 3 weeks since the valley had swallowed her figure on that last morning. Every day a messenger had arrived from Versailles bearing news of the council, and every letter told him the same. Count Varnier was condemned for treason. The Queen had faced her ministers with calm authority, and the kingdom had bowed once more before her strength. Still she did not write. He told himself she would not. She could not. A queen belonged to her people, not to one man's heart. Yet every evening, when the sky turned crimson, he found himself standing on the same terrace, staring down the winding road, waiting for the impossible. That evening was no different. The air was warm and quiet. Baptiste approached him with a letter sealed in blue wax. From the palace again, my lord, he said softly. They say it came by royal courier. Julian took it carefully. The seal bore the Queen's crest, her personal one, the one used for private correspondence. His heart thudded once hard. He broke it open. The words were few. At dusk tomorrow by the chapel at Montclair. Come alone. I have kept my promise. The letter trembled slightly in his hand. He looked up, the vineyard spinning in the amber light. She is coming back, he whispered. Baptiste's face broke into a cautious smile. Then God has remembered mercy. Not mercy, Julien said softly. Destiny. The following day, Montclair awoke under skies so clear it felt as though the storm of the past months had never been. Julien dressed simply, not as a nobleman, but as the man he had been before the court had known his name. As he walked down the path toward the small chapel hidden among the vines, his pulse quickened. Every step seemed to echo with the memory of the night he had first seen her, alone, frightened, a woman in the rain. He reached the chapel as the sun began to sink. The door stood open, and light spilled across the threshold. For a moment he hesitated, then he stepped inside. She was there. Queen Isabel stood by the altar, her gown of pale gold catching the evening light. Her hair was loose, and for the first time since he had met her, she wore no crown. She turned as he entered, and when their eyes met, the world seemed to still. "You came," she said softly. "I would have come if you had called from the end of the world." She smiled faintly. "I feared you might refuse." "I could refuse the crown, the title, even my name," he said, moving closer. "But not you." For a moment she said nothing. Then she reached into her cloak and withdrew a folded parchment. "This arrived at Montclair this morning, though it bears yesterday's date. It is from the council. They have declared me free to rule without regency. Count Varnier's sentence is final." "I am glad," Julien said quietly. "I am not finished," she replied. "There was another decree, one I wrote myself. It restores your title, your lands, and your honor." Julian's expression softened. "You have already given me more than any decree could." She took a step closer. "You misunderstand me. This was not charity. It was justice." He smiled, the first true smile he had felt in weeks. "Justice is a dangerous gift, Your Majesty. It binds those who give it as tightly as those who receive it." "I know," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "That is why I came." He looked at her then, not as a queen, not even as a woman of power, but as the same figure who had stepped from the shadows by the Seine, whose eyes had begged for mercy and found it. "What will become of us, Isabel?" he asked softly. "What we choose," she said. He shook his head. "You are a queen. I am only a man who happened to be in your path." "You are the man who changed it," she answered. "Do you think I can return to the palace now? To the endless ceremony, the flattery, the lies? Every word I hear there will remind me of the truth I left behind in you. Then what do you ask of me?" "I ask nothing," she said. "I offer everything." The words struck him like breath after drowning. She stepped closer, her voice steady now. "I have lived half my life under duty. I will live the rest under choice. France will not crumble because its queen loves a man of honor. And if it does, then I will rebuild it with my own hands." He could not speak. His heart swelled with both joy and fear. "The world will condemn you," he said at last. "The world condemned me long before it understood me," she said. "Let them speak. I am tired of silence." He took her hand then, slowly, reverently, as though it were something sacred. "You know what this means?" "Yes," she whispered. "It means I am free." For a moment, neither moved. The light through the window turned golden, falling across their joined hands. Then she lifted her other hand to his face, her touch gentle, hesitant at first, then sure. "The night you saved me, I thought I had met mercy. I was wrong. I met love." Julian's voice was rough. "You are certain this is what you want?" Her eyes met his. "I have never been more certain of anything." The air between them seemed to tremble. He bent his head, and their foreheads touched lightly, a quiet promise sealed by breath rather than words. For the first time, she was not a queen, and he was not a subject. They were simply two souls who had endured too much to doubt what remained. Outside, the chapel bells began to ring from the valley below. Julien lifted his head, startled. Isabel smiled. "Do you hear that? I ordered them rung before I left Versailles." "For what reason?" "For this one," she said softly. "A queen may choose when to crown her own happiness." He looked at her astonished. "You planned all this?" "Not all," she admitted. "Only the part where I come back to you." Julien laughed then, a quiet, disbelieving sound that turned to something deeper. "You are remarkable, and you," she said, are late in saying what you feel. He hesitated only a heartbeat before speaking. I love you, Isabel. I loved you the moment I saw you in the rain. I loved you when you sat upon the throne and pretended not to know me. I have loved you through exile, through silence, through every breath of doubt. Her smile trembled. Then I am twice blessed, for I have waited my whole life to hear those words and to believe them. He drew her into his arms. The embrace was not hurried, not desperate. It was calm, full, and certain, as if the years themselves had led only to this single moment. When they parted, she whispered, "There is something else you must know." "What?" "I have spoken to the council. They will accept a regency for the months ahead. I will remain queen, but I will rule from Montclair. This will be our home." He stared at her in disbelief. "You mean to govern from here?" "Yes. The heart of France is not in its marble halls, but in its people. And here I can be both queen and woman without deceit." Julian shook his head slowly, wonder in his eyes. "You risk everything," she smiled. "Then let the world see what love can risk and still endure." They walked out into the evening. The sky blazed with color, streaks of crimson and gold melting into the hills. The vineyards swayed in the breeze like a living sea. Isabel turned toward him, her eyes bright with tears that were not sorrow but release. "Do you remember," she said, "the night by the Seine, when I asked if you believed in Providence?" "Yes. And you said you believed in choice." He smiled. "I remember. I think now," she said, "that they are the same thing." He took her hand again, and together they walked down the narrow path through the vines. The workers in the distance paused to watch as they passed, whispering softly to one another. None bowed, but all smiled. The people of Montclair had always known when truth stood before them. As they reached the end of the field, Julienne stopped. "What happens now?" "Now?" Isabel said, tilting her head. "Now, my lord, you may kiss your queen." He hesitated for only a breath. Then he drew her close, his hand at her back, her fingers resting against his chest, and the world seemed to fold around them. The kiss was not hurried or fierce. It was deep, quiet, and full of peace. It was the answer to every question left unspoken since that night by the river. When at last they parted, the last light of the day had faded. Stars began to prick the sky one by one. They walked back toward the chapel, where a few of the villagers had gathered, men and women who had served the Montclair family for generations. Baptiste stood among them, beaming through tears. "It seems, my lord," he said, "that Montclair has its blessing at last." Julian looked at Isabel. She nodded, her hand still in his. "Let it be known," she said gently, her voice carrying over the quiet crowd, "that mercy has not perished from this world. It lives wherever love dares defy fear." The people bowed their heads, not in ceremony but in affection. The chapel bells rang again, clear and bright against the night. Later, as the stars deepened and the guests returned to their homes, Julian and Isabel stood alone on the terrace. The scent of lavender drifted through the air. She leaned against him, her voice low. "Do you think they will speak of us kindly?" "Some will," he said. "Some will not. But I do not care what they say." "Nor I," she murmured. "As long as we are true." He turned to her, his smile soft. "Then truth will reign." She laughed quietly, resting her head on his shoulder. "I think France is safe in such hands." They stood in silence for a long time, watching the horizon. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Julian, do you remember how our story began?" "Yes. A storm, a frightened woman by the river, and a man who offered his hand without knowing who she was. And would again," he said, "1,000 times." Her eyes glistened. "Then perhaps our story should end as it began, with a promise." He lifted her hand, pressing a kiss to it. "Then promise me this," he said softly. "Whatever the world may bring, whatever time may take from us, let no fear steal what we have found." She looked up at him, the starlight reflected in her eyes. "Never," she whispered, "for love that is born of mercy cannot die." Julian drew her close once more, and they stood together beneath the endless sky, their hearts beating in rhythm with the quiet world around them. And as dawn broke over Montclair, its light falling on the chapel, the vineyards, and the two figures on the terrace, the world seemed to pause in gentle recognition that at last love had triumphed over fear, and mercy had become the crown both had long deserved. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.